The diminished scale. I've come to find that it is one of the most widely used scales in film scoring. It's a scale outside of the normal major and minor modes that can create a lot of tension and unrest while still being incredibly easy to access and use. This scale, also known as an octatonic scale, is a symmetrical scale that consists of alternating whole and half steps. In other words, the entire scale goes like this: whole, half, whole, half, whole, half, whole, etc., etc. But because we can start with a whole step instead of a half step and vice versa, there are two forms of the diminished scale. The first is called a dominant diminished scale, which starts with a half step and alternates from there, and the second is called a tonic diminished scale, which starts with a whole step and alternates from there. But for the sake of clarity in my reductions and in this video, I generally just refer to the occurrence of a diminished scale as simply that, a diminished scale, because the diminished scale repeats itself every minor third. This is why there are only 3 unique diminished scales, and why I generally don't differentiate between the two forms. Now, although this scale has a deep root in jazz improvisation, and probably why it's found very often in John Williams' writing, it's found a lot of use in movie scenes of unease or high suspense. So let's take 3 examples from 3 different movies from 3 different composers and see how they've used this scale. The first, one that I'm sure many of you are very familiar with, is the Battle of Hoth sequence, written by John Williams. These cues are absolutely littered with references to the diminished scale. You can first hear it here at the beginning of the cue in the piano. If we take a closer look here, we can see the diminished pattern loud and clear. And since this motif is persistent throughout the whole cue, it helps create a ton of suspense for this awesome battle sequence. Another great use of the diminished scale is these string clusters. It's not as obvious that these are from the diminished scale, but if we spread the notes out here, it becomes much more apparent. And although Williams skips a note in the scale here and there, that diminished sound is super apparent. But moving on, the next example comes from The Mummy, a slightly less well-known film, but one that features a great score by a great composer, Jerry Goldsmith. Specifically, he uses the diminished scale for a slightly different effect in this scene while still being in an action setting. Unlike The Empire Strikes Back, this film contained a lot more humor in the midst of its really dark undertones. After the use of the scale under some dialogue, the scale is used for a very long extended period of time as our protagonists run and scurry about. The effect here is a little bit different from Hoth, as it's a little bit more literal with what's happening on screen. Brendan Fraser runs, so the music, using a diminished scale, runs along with him. It seems a little more comedic this way, while still being able to build tension. But the last example comes from the climactic sequence from Back to the Future, written by Alan Silvestri. Now, this film is an enormous lesson in the diminished scale, as it's literally a defining feature of the score as a whole. It's used extensively throughout the entire sequence to build tension, starting off here. These chords, separated by a tritone, which make up the diminished scale, and this seemingly never-ending ascending diminished scale. In this sequence, it's not really used as battle music or as a slightly comedic scurrying figure. Rather, it seems to be here for suspense and tension, and Silvestri does a masterful job with this. As you can see, the diminished scale can be used for a lot of different effects. It's a very colorful and versatile scale that can be added to your toolbox while still being incredibly easy to access. All you gotta do You start on a note and go in any direction using a whole-half pattern or a half-whole pattern. Now, in an attempt to make these videos very bite-sized and practical, I've simply described how the scale works and how you can use it. But if you want to know why the scale works the way that it does, then I've linked several videos in the description below from Rick Beato going into great detail explaining why and what sounds you can get from the scale. But anyway, if you like what I do and you want to support me in exchange for possibly early access, analysis PDFs, and more, then please consider adding your support to my Patreon page. Every little bit goes a long way. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you later. Goodbye.